The boy looked lost among the crowd. Too quiet, too still for an airport full of noise. His shoes didn't match. His birth certificate was smudged, and the man beside him kept gripping his shoulder a little too tight. Most people passed without noticing, but not the canine. One bark, then another. Sharp, focused, and suddenly what looked like just another deportation became something else entirely. A suitcase. A scent. A secret. Before we uncover what really happened that day, don't forget to like this video, subscribe for more true stories that hit hard, and let us know in the comments, where are you watching from? The waiting hall of Terminal 4 at LAX buzzed with the usual chorus of languages. Wheels of carry-ons rumbling across linoleum, and intercom announcements muffled through static. It was the kind of chaos that swallowed moments whole. Yet within that storm of movement, one figure stood unnaturally still. A boy no older than 9, holding a tattered red backpack with both arms wrapped tight around his name was Mateo. He had deep brown eyes that darted like frightened birds, and skin sun-kissed by desert winds. The navy hoodie he wore was a size too large, the sleeves falling over his knuckles. His lips didn't move, but his eyes screamed one thing: "Don't leave me." Beside him stood a tall man in a crisp beige blazer, holding a manila folder and an air of practiced patience. Mr. Alvarez. He had the kind of face that charmed customs officers: salt and pepper hair, warm smile, wire-rimmed glasses that made him look like someone's favorite uncle. But the officers at immigration weren't smiling anymore. One of them, a middle-aged Latina named Officer Rivera, held up the paper Alvarez had handed her, a birth certificate. It was creased and smudged at the corners, and though it bore Mateo's name, something about it felt off. The font was outdated, the seal barely visible. Rivera narrowed her eyes, then leaned in, her voice soft but laced with tension. "Sir, where are the legal guardianship documents?" Mr. Alvarez smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "He's my nephew. His parents, they passed. I'm taking him to live with me in Albuquerque." Rivera didn't blink. "That's not what I asked." Behind the glass pane of secondary inspection, Mateo watched the exchange unfold. He didn't understand all the words, but he understood tone, and that tone was cold. A border agent in a Navy uniform stood in front of him, speaking gently but asking over and over, "Do you know this man? Is he really your uncle?" Mateo kept nodding, kept whispering, "Sí, es mi tío," but his hands wouldn't stop shaking. A few yards away, a camera in the corner of the room blinked silently, recording everything. Another officer approached Mr. Alvarez, asking him to come to a more secure area. "He just need to verify a few things. Please cooperate." Alvarez nodded. Serene. Too serene. In a back office, the verification team pulled up the entry logs. There was no record of Mateo ever being registered under an unaccompanied minor program. No matching travel reservation from the same last name. And Alvarez's file, while clean, looked too perfect. No priors, no red flags, like a sheet that had been freshly printed yesterday. Meanwhile, Rivera tried to scan the barcode on the birth certificate. It wouldn't scan. They called in a translator just in case. A young woman in a green Homeland Security vest knelt beside Mateo, speaking in slow, careful Spanish. "Did he ever hurt you? Has anyone told you not to speak to strangers?" Mateo glanced up, lips parting, but then Mr. Alvarez appeared at the doorway. His gaze locked onto Mateo's, stern and piercing. The boy's mouth shut again. Rivera made a decision. She leaned over and whispered something to her colleague, and within moments, Mateo was being gently led away from Mr. Alvarez. "It's just a temporary hold, sir, until we clear things up." Alvarez said nothing, just adjusted his blazer and looked at the clock. "I understand," he replied, but his eyes flicked to the folder the officers had taken from him. A flicker of something dark passed through them. In a small, childish interview room with cartoon posters peeling from the walls, Mateo sat clutching a juice box unopened. He stared at the mirror on the wall. He knew someone was behind it, watching, but what they didn't know was that Mateo had memorized every detail of what Mr. Alvarez told him to say, what not to say, and what would happen if he didn't listen. But still, he was starting to forget why this man was even helping him. The truth was, they'd only met 5 days ago, in a house full of children, and bars on the windows. The room smelled faintly of disinfectant and something older, like dried sweat and plastic chairs warmed by too many anxious bodies. Mateo sat on the edge of the small vinyl cushion, legs swinging slowly, his red backpack crumpled at his feet. The juice box still sat on the table in front of him, untouched. He hadn't spoken in nearly 10 minutes. Across from him, Officer Rivera flipped slowly through a printed intake report, her pen tapping against the table with quiet precision. Every few seconds, she glanced up, her face unreadable, waiting for the boy to make eye contact. He never did. Instead, Mateo stared at the floor, lips pressed into a thin line, fingers fiddling with the zipper of his hoodie. Then, without looking up, he whispered so softly Rivera almost thought she imagined it. "He's not my uncle." She blinked. "What did you say?" Still not looking up, Mateo repeated, a hair louder this time. "He's not my family." The pen stopped tapping. Rivera leaned in, her voice gentler now, like a teacher calming a frightened student. "Mateo, can you tell me what you mean?" The boy shook his head slowly, curls bouncing, eyes still fixed on the tiled floor. "He picked me. In a house, there were lots of kids. He said I looked quiet." The words came in broken fragments, but each one landed like a weight on. She scribbled something quickly on a notepad and stood, speaking into the small radio on her belt in hushed tones. Outside, the sterile hallway of the customs wing remained busy but orderly. Luggage carts moved in clean lines and travelers shuffled with passports in hand. But near the inspection lane, the air suddenly shifted. The stillness broke. Bruno, a 6-year-old canine unit German shepherd, had been calmly walking alongside his handler, Officer Grant. The dog had performed dozens of searches, from narcotics busts to explosive alerts. But this moment was different. Without warning, Bruno's body stiffened. His ears shot forward, tail rigid, nose flaring with intensity. Then, with a sudden lunge that nearly yanked Grant off his feet, Bruno darted toward the screening zone where Alvarez's belongings had been placed for recheck. "Bruno, heel!" Grant barked, but the command was swallowed by the dog's furious barking. The sound cut through the air like an alarm, sending several TSA agents into motion. Bruno was circling a black Samsonite suitcase, medium-sized, standard make, its zipper slightly frayed, a red tag reading priority swinging gently from the handle. His paws scratched at the sides, nose pressed hard against the seams, growling gently now, louder, more insistent. Grant caught up, pulling hard on the leash. "Get me a scan," he ordered. One officer brought over a handheld chemical sensor, another a pair of gloves. They opened the case cautiously. At first glance it looked harmless, clothes folded neatly, a shaving kit, a pair of child sneakers size 2. But buried beneath a thin layer of shirts was a plastic bag wrapped tightly in duct tape. Inside, soaked into the fibers of what appeared to be a discarded white undershirt, was blood, old, dark, flaked at the edges, dry, but unmistakably human. Bruno sat beside the suitcase now, calm again, as if satisfied he had said all he needed to. Grant's voice turned hard. "Chain of custody. Secure this, now." Meanwhile, Mr. Alvarez was sipping from a water bottle in a side room when 2 uniformed officers stepped in, eyes no longer polite. "We need you to come with us. You thought you were verifying documents." "We are," one of them replied coldly. "We'd just like to verify the blood found in your suitcase too." Back in the interview room, Rivera returned with a different energy in her step. She crouched beside Mateo, not too close, but enough for him to see her face clearly. "Mateo," she said, "you've done something very brave." The boy flinched, unsure whether it was praise or punishment. "Do you know whose blood that is?" He shook his head, frightened again. "He said it was ketchup," he mumbled, eyes now wide, terrified. "He told me to say it was ketchup." Rivera swallowed hard. Outside, the hallway buzzed. A Department of Homeland Security representative had arrived, her badge gleaming against her dark blue blazer. Agents were on the phone with Interpol, digging into Alvarez's aliases. His prints were clean, but the suitcase DNA was already flagged as matching an open case from Texas. A missing girl, 11 years old, last seen entering a black SUV. The photo showed the same sneakers now sitting quietly on the inspection table. Alvarez remained calm even as handcuffs clicked into place. "You're making a mistake," he told them. "I'm just a man trying to help my nephew." His voice was so convincing that one of the younger agents almost hesitated. Almost, But then Bruno passed by, eyes locked on Alvarez, growling low in his throat again. That told them all they needed to know. Rivera stayed behind with Mateo. She brought him a blanket, finally convinced him to sip from the juice box. His hands trembled the whole time. I think he was going to sell me, Mateo finally said. His voice was barely audible. Rivera closed her eyes for a second, then opened them, determined. Not anymore, she whispered. And outside, the sun was beginning to rise over the airport tarmac. Inside the sterile, fluorescent-lit evidence room, the suitcase sat beneath a ring of harsh overhead lights. Every item had been laid out on a blue forensic sheet by gloved hands, each piece catalogued and numbered. Officer Grant stood over the scene with a growing frown as his eyes moved from object to object. Socks, toothpaste, a child's sketchbook with 2 missing pages, and then, beneath it all, the shirt. It was small, white, stained in patches of dark red. Faded blue dinosaurs danced along the sleeves. It wasn't folded, but crumpled, as if it had been shoved there in haste. A single button was missing, torn away, the thread dangling loose. Grant didn't speak as he knelt beside it. He didn't have to. He already knew. Next to it, wrapped in a thin plastic bag, was a folding knife, handle chipped, blade slightly rusted near the base. Blood had dried at the hinge, dark and sticky. There was a name faintly scratched into the wood. A. The initials matched nothing yet, but they would, and soon. Alvarez sat in an interrogation room 2 floors above, handcuffed to a steel bar on the table. The windowless walls seemed to press in around him. One security camera blinked red from the corner ceiling, recording every breath, every blink. The man's posture was flawless. Calm hands, squared shoulders, a quiet stillness that felt unnatural, calculated. His gray slacks were neatly pressed, blazer removed and draped across the back of the chair. His face was unreadable, as if waiting for a script to be handed to him. Across from him sat Special Agent Marissa Chan, a veteran of 20 years with ICE's Human Trafficking Task Force. Her presence was silent but imposing. She held a case file in her hands but didn't open it yet. She just watched Alvarez, letting the quiet do the heavy lifting. Finally she spoke, her tone surgical. "Do you recognize this shirt?" She slid a photograph across the table. Alvarez didn't glance down. "No," he replied flatly. "Should I?" Chan didn't blink. "We found it in your luggage, along with a child's sneakers and a knife, all soaked in blood." Alvarez let out a soft breath. "I told your officers I was attacked. At the border, a week ago. I used the shirt." Chan raised one brow and flipped open the folder. "Funny," she said, her voice now colder. "Because according to CBP logs, there's no record of you reporting any injuries. And medical screening at the entry checkpoint 3 days ago shows no lacerations, abrasions, or contusions. Your body was clean, not a mark on it." Alvarez tilted his head slightly. "Maybe I heal fast." "This time of Mateo. The boy said he met you in a house, that you picked him." For the first time a flicker passed through Alvarez's expression. Just a flicker. Then it vanished. "I'm his legal guardian," he said smoothly. "His mother died in Mexico. His father, never in the picture. The paperwork's pending, which I told your officer. That's why the birth certificate was all I had on hand." Chan leaned in slightly. "Pending through what court?" she asked. "Because we checked family court in El Paso, Tucson, Albuquerque, and San Diego. No active petition under your name or the boy's." Alvarez exhaled slowly. "You can believe what you want, but I did nothing illegal." "Then why is the boy terrified of you?" she fired back. "Why does he flinch every time your name is mentioned?" Alvarez gave her a hollow smile. "Children are fragile. He's confused, he lost his mother. Trauma does strange things." Chan reached into the folder and pulled out the forensic report. The shirt had type O blood. Mateo is type A. And the blood on the knife? Also type O. But the boy says you never bled. So whose blood is it, Mr. Alvarez? Alvarez stayed quiet. His eyes dropped to the table for the first time. One finger twitched slightly in the cuff. A pause. Then, "Mine," he said, quieter now. "I panicked and didn't report it. I didn't want delays. I was afraid they wouldn't let me cross with Mateo. I made a mistake, okay, but I wasn't trying to hurt anyone." Chan wasn't buying it. She stood and nodded toward the mirrored wall. The door opened, and another agent stepped in. whispering something to her in Spanish. She nodded once and turned back to Alvarez. "We've pulled your last 6 months of travel. You've crossed the border under 3 different aliases, and one of them matches a case involving 2 missing Honduran children last fall." Still, Alvarez said nothing. Not a flicker of guilt, just a subtle shift of posture, like someone preparing for a long night ahead. Back downstairs, Rivera stood watching Mateo sleep on a padded bench under a warm throw. The boy had finally passed out from exhaustion, cheek pressed against his backpack, one hand still gripping the strap. Beside her, Grant entered, holding a Ziploc bag containing the dinosaur-in shirt. "We just got the initial blood report," he said quietly. "He's a match. We found a missing persons alert out of Laredo from 3 weeks ago. A boy named Andres Delgado, age 9, went missing from a processing center. His aunt said he was wearing a white shirt with dinosaurs." Rivera looked through the window again at the sleeping child. "He doesn't know," she whispered. "He doesn't know what could have happened to him if Bruno hadn't barked." Upstairs, Chan closed her folder slowly, walked around the table and leaned down near Alvarez. "You're not going anywhere," she said in a low voice. "And this time, no amount of fake paperwork or calm smiles is going to save you." Alvarez looked up at her, finally blinking. "You don't know who I work for," he muttered. Chan's smile was razor sharp. "That's what scares me." Outside, the hallway lights flickered as a new shift of agents arrived. One of them was leading Bruno back into the main lobby. The dog paused near the hallway leading to the holding cells. His ears perked again. He growled, a sound low, intent. He turned not toward Alvarez this time, but toward someone else, someone who hadn't spoken yet. The room was colder than before, or maybe it just felt that way. Mateo sat at the far end of a long table in a smaller briefing room inside the ICE regional facility. He wore a fresh sweatshirt someone had given him, and clutched a paper cup of hot chocolate, untouched and rapidly cooling. His eyes followed the movements of the adults in the room, silent and sharp. Rivera sat beside him, speaking gently but firmly, trying to prepare him. "Mateo," she said, laying a folder on the table, "I need to show you something. It's very important you tell me if you recognize anything, okay?" He nodded once, wary. She opened the folder and pulled out a photograph printed in color. It was a still image taken from a surveillance camera, time-stamped 2 days prior at the San Ysidro border crossing. In the image, Alvarez was clearly visible, same gray blazer, same confident walk, but what made Mateo's breath hitch was the child in his arm, the little girl. Not him, not even close. She looked maybe 5 or 6 years old, her face buried against Alvarez's shoulder, her body limp, not asleep but subdued. Her small hand dangled in the air, lifeless. Mateo stared at the photo for a long moment before whispering, "That's not me." Rivera leaned forward. "Do you know who she is?" He shook his head. "No, I never saw her before. This was taken 2 days ago," Rivera explained. "But Alvarez claimed you crossed the border with him 3 days ago. That means he brought someone else over after you." Mateo's hands clenched into fists. "He said I was the only one," he said softly, as if saying it out loud would undo the lie. Rivera placed a gentle hand over his. "You don't think he ever told you the truth, Mateo?" Down the hall in the archive division, 2 agents were going through facial recognition hits connected to Alvarez's travel history. Dozens of files pulled from border crossings, security footage, and transportation hubs. Many didn't match his current ID, but the algorithm had flagged one image from 7 months ago in El Paso, Texas. In it, the same man, slightly longer hair, darker sunglasses, was seen escorting a teenage boy into a black van. The photo had been marked for follow-up. The file, labeled Suspicious Child Transfer, but the case status was closed. No charges, no follow-up, nothing. Agent Derek Klein, a DHS veteran of 13 years, leaned back in his chair, lips tight. "This guy's been around longer than we thought," he muttered. His colleague Jen Alcott stared at the file history, scrolling through notes made in previous systems. "Here," she said suddenly, tapping the screen. "Look at this. 4 years ago, an investigation was opened in Las Cruces, smuggling minors. Same physical description, same damn name. But the case got dropped after the lead officer retired." "Dropped?" Klein echoed, incredulous. "Or buried?" They pulled up the case notes. A senior ICE officer had once flagged Alvarez under a different alias for suspicious border crossings and inconsistent child custody documents. The report mentioned the words organized channel, non-biological escort, and fabricated identity. But the last note simply read, insufficient evidence for prosecution, file archive. Klein swore under his breath. How the hell does this keep happening? Back in the observation room, Agent Chan stared through the one-way glass at Alvarez, who now sat cross-legged in his holding cell, reading a newspaper with studied calm. He hadn't asked for a lawyer, hadn't called anyone, almost like he didn't need to. She turned to Rivera. We need to go deeper. He's not a freelancer. He's part of something bigger, something structured. He confirmed that Alvarez brought someone else in after him. That means we're talking about a rotation system. He's a handler. Chan's phone buzzed. It was Jen from Archives. You're not going to believe this, she said. We found 3 separate investigations with the same face. Different names, but the same guy. And every single one went cold. Chan's story, Chan said, border entries with minors. Always claiming family ties. No actual DNA link. In at least 2 cases, the children were never found again. They pulled surveillance footage from multiple ports. A chilling pattern emerged. Alvarez always entered with a child. Always alone, never the same kid twice. Sometimes he walked, sometimes he used private transport. But the trail never lasted more than a day after entry. Each case ended in administrative murk, transfers, clerical gaps, or sudden file closures. Rivera rubbed her forehead. You realize what this means, right? Chan nodded. He's a ghost. But not just that. Someone's clearing his tracks. Mateo was now sitting quietly as Rivera re-entered the room. She knelt beside him again, showing him another image. This one from a security feed near a motel in Arizona. Do you recognize this place? Mateo studied it, then nodded. That's where he first told me to call him uncle. He traced his finger along the door number, room 204. Rivera's breath caught. The timestamp was from 6 days ago. Meanwhile, Klein was deep in an internal database search, trying to track all caseworkers and officers who had previously interacted with Alvarez. One name kept reappearing. Charles Detmer, a former Customs and Border Protection supervisor now retired. The notes from Detmer's evaluations mentioned Alvarez by name, but never as a threat. Instead, they marked him cooperative, community-minded, child advocate. Klein narrowed his eyes. Who writes a trafficker up as a child advocate? He ran a secondary background on Detmer and found several consulting payments from a logistics company known for its involvement in private transport along the border. Shell companies. Misdirection. The web was starting to show itself. Bruno, resting in the corner of the command room, suddenly lifted his head again. He stood, ears twitching. His handler raised an eyebrow. What is it, boy? Bruno walked to the door, sniffing hard along the base, then growled low and steady. A moment later, the elevator doors opened at the end of the hall, and 2 men in suits stepped out. One flashed a federal badge, Department of Legal Oversight. Chan turned sharply. No one requested oversight. You didn't have to, the taller one said. We're here to take custody of Mr. Alvarez. This case is under federal review now. Rivera stepped forward. You're not taking him anywhere. He's connected to an open trafficking investigation. But the agent simply handed her a printed order, signed by the deputy secretary himself. As of now, Alvarez is under direct federal protection. Mateo stood behind the glass wall, watching everything, his small fingers pressed against the cold surface. He didn't understand the words, but he could feel the shift in the air. Bruno barked once. Loud, sudden. Everyone froze. The atmosphere in the ICE facility had turned heavy with unspoken suspicion. After the appearance of the federal agents claiming custody over Alvarez, every step, every decision felt precarious. The local task force, now deeply entangled in something far beyond its jurisdiction, was forced to relinquish Alvarez under protest. He had been escorted through a side hallway under armed guard, eyes steady, lips pressed in a faint, victorious smile. But while Alvarez was removed from the building, the investigation had not stalled. Mateo, too young to grasp the full magnitude of the political shadows shifting around him, remained a child in danger, and that danger wasn't over. Not even close. Agent Chan and Rivera had spent the past hour reviewing next steps for Mateo's immediate care. Protocol demanded that he be placed under protective supervision with a vetted social worker until a longer-term solution could be arranged. His safety, they both knew, depended on layers of bureaucracy that moved slower than the forces already hunting children like him. When the assigned social worker finally arrived, just before sunset, she carried all the right credentials. Her name was listed in the National Foster Liaison Registry. Her badge matched the digital profile. Her demeanor was calm, nurturing, with an easy smile and a clipboard full of process checklists. Her name was Angela Hart, mid-30s, glasses, a soft lavender sweater draped over her gray slacks, a gentle tone to her voice when she greeted Mateo, crouching slightly to his level. "Hi, Mateo. I'm here to help take you somewhere safe, okay? Just for a little while." Rivera watched from the other side of the glass partition, arms folded. Something in her gut churned uneasily. She didn't know why. Hart had passed the vetting system with flying colors. Her records were clean, her history in social services spanned nearly a decade, but instincts honed by years of dealing with fractured systems told Rivera that something didn't feel quite right. When Angela reached out her hand for Mateo to take, the boy hesitated, but then nodded and took it. Brunon, resting at Rivera's side, rose slowly to his feet. The hairs along his spine bristled. As Mateo walked past the desk, still holding Angela's hand, Bruno stepped forward. One bark, then another, sharper, deeper. Everyone in the room turned. The German shepherd's eyes locked onto Hart, his entire body tensing. He growled a low, guttural warning and began pulling on the leash, straining forward. Rivera instinctively tightened her grip, but Bruno was stronger, much stronger. "Heel," she commanded, but the dog was already circling Angela, barking furiously, body rigid, nose flaring at the base of her handbag. Hart froze, visibly startled. What's going on?" she asked, trying to sound amused, but her voice wavered. "Why is he doing that?" Bruno snapped once toward the strap of her bag, teeth bared, not to bite but to warn, to show exactly where the threat lay. Rivera stepped in. "Matthew Hart, I need you to step back and place your bag on the table." Angela blinked. "Excuse me?" Now, the tone was no longer polite. Angela slowly removed her bag and set it down. Rivera signaled Grant, who brought over a scanner and gloves. Angela started to protest. "I don't understand, this is completely inappropriate. Standard protocol." Grant interrupted. "Just a routine sweep. The dog's trained to alert on certain electronic signatures." When the scanner hovered over the base of the bag, it beeped sharply. Then again, Rivera narrowed her eyes. "Unpack it." Angela hesitated. Her fingers trembled slightly as she opened the zipper. Inside were the usual items: wallet, tissues, a spiral-bound notepad, pens. But wedged beneath the lining was a slim device, black, no larger than a matchbox, with an antenna no civilian phone should carry. Grant reached for it with tweezers. "What the hell is that?" Rivera muttered. "It's not a phone, it's a tracker." Chan, summoned by the commotion, stepped in just as the internal tech team connected the device to a secured port. "We're pulling the logs now," one agent said, typing rapidly. The screen lit up with data points, hundreds of them. "Coordinates." "There are movement logs," the tech said grimly. "They line up with every major border crossing in the last 3 months. "From where to where?" Chan asked. "From multiple shelters to known drop-off zones in interior cities. And it's tracking minors. See this designation? ID tags associated with individual children. This thing isn't just recording, it's transmitting." Angela's face had lost all color. I don't know where that came from," she stammered. "Someone must have planted it." "You're telling me someone planted a government-grade tracking device in your purse without you noticing?" Chan snapped. "And it just happens to match data from trafficking routes?" Angela shook her head, breath ragged. "I swear I don't know." Bruno barked again, louder this time. The room filled with motion. 2 officers restrained Angela as she was pulled from the room, her cries of innocence echoing behind her. Rivera turned to Mateo, who had backed into the corner, wide-eyed. "You're okay," he whispered, kneeling. "You're okay, he did it again." Bruno did it again. In the command center, data analysts worked fast. The tracker had more than just location logs. It had communications metadata. encrypted messages sent via untraceable pings. Several IPs traced back to shell corporations tied to private transit firms. One name kept popping up, a logistics company supposedly hired to handle foster transfers across state lines. But the contracts didn't match the Department of Child Services files. They matched names from redacted reports Rivera had seen once before, reports tied to Operation Latch, an abandoned interagency sting that had collapsed 2 years ago without a single conviction. Grant approached with a tablet. "There's more," he said grimly. "The device was synced to another one. Guess where it last pinged?" Chan took the tablet. Her eyes widened. "Inside this building." Rivera looked over her shoulder. The ping wasn't from Angela's bag. It was coming from a room just down the hall. Room 117. "That's the evidence archive," she said slowly. "No one should be in." Rivera's hand dropped to her sidearm. Chan gave a quick nod, signaling backup. Mateo, now clutching Bruno's collar tightly, watched as the agents moved out, tense and fast, heading down the dim hallway toward room 117. Behind them, the overhead lights flickered briefly, as if reacting to something unseen. Mateo looked up at Bruno's collar tightly, watched as the agents moved again, muscles tight, ears forward. He was staring at the hallway door, growling low and steady, like he already knew. The corridor leading to room 117 was tight and dimly lit, with old fluorescent bulbs humming faintly above. As Agent Chan approached with Rivera and 2 armed officers, their boots echoed against the concrete floor like a steady drumroll building towards something inevitable. Chan motioned for silence. She placed her hand on the doorknob slowly, only to find it already ajar. The metal groaned as it swung inward. The archive room, a space usually reserved for sealed boxes and labeled folders, now looked ransacked. Drawers were left open, documents scattered across the ground like a paper storm, and a faint smell of rubbing alcohol lingered in the air. "Someone was here," Rivera muttered, kneeling by an overturned file cabinet, "and they were looking for something specific." One of the agents found a rubber glove caught in the doorframe, too clean, too deliberate, almost staged. "You need surveillance footage," Chan said, turning to the radio on her shoulder. "Get me every second of video from this wing over the last 6 hours." Back in the command center, a junior analyst named Layla sat hunched over her keyboard, eyes scanning metadata pulled from the tracker Bruno had identified. The logs were not only extensive, they were chilling. 17 confirmed routes, 17 different children, different names, same route. Each matched a supposed social worker ID and a fabricated birth certificate, all bearing identical formatting, identical state seals, identical ink degradation, as if run through the same counterfeit process. The youngest was 4. The oldest just turned 11. Every single one had been labeled in reports as transferred, but none had ever arrived at their destination shelters. "Agent Chan," Layla called over the comms, "I think we found something big." Within minutes, the task force had gathered around a central monitor. The screen displayed a spreadsheet, rows of names and dates paired with vague transfer notations. "This is the DHS internal cross-jurisdictional log for displaced minors," Layla explained. "We thought it was clean, but once we isolated for the birth certificate format flagged in Mateo's intake look." She highlighted the data. 17 matches, same font, same form number, same forged registrar signature. Chan stepped forward. "All these kids disappeared? No official record after point of entry," Layla confirmed. "On paper, they were handed over to state shelters, but there's no intake acknowledgement from any of them." Rivera leaned in, her voice cold. "That's not paperwork, that's erasure." Mateo, sitting in the adjacent briefing room with Bruno curled loyally beside him, watched officers pace behind glass panels. Though he couldn't hear them, the urgency was painted in their faces. Rivera returned moments later, crouching beside him again. "Mateo," she said softly, "I need to ask you something else. I know you're tired, but this could help other kids. A lot of other kids. Do you remember anything about the trip? Anything strange? Something Alvarez did that seemed odd?" Mateo was quiet for a long time. His hands gripped the hem of his sweatshirt. Then, almost as if the memory had been hiding in a shadow, he whispered, "He gave me candy." "Candy?" Rivera asked gently. He nodded. "A big mint. He said I had to suck on it while we walked through the gate. He made me, you kind of candy? Like peppermint, but it tasted bitter. It made me feel sleepy, even though I wasn't tired. Rivera's heart stuttered. Did you pass out? No, Mateo said, but everything got blurry. I couldn't think well. Rivera stood quickly and returned to the lab tech team. Test the candy wrapper from Mateo's backpack, swab it for anything chemical. Within 20 minutes, the report came back. Trace elements of chloroform and lidocaine. Just enough to dull the senses, not enough to knock someone out. He was dosing them, Chan said almost to herself. Making them compliant, dull, easy to handle, no wonder. Border agents never noticed anything off, they looked calm. Grant joined them with a case folder. You're gonna want to see this. It's from an internal audit. Conducted 2 months ago, buried inside a quarterly shelter evaluation. He opened the report. Page 14, an anonymous whistleblower noted a recurring anomaly. Duplicate birth certificates used at ports of entry, often followed by lost contact notices filed days later. The report was marked as inconclusive and shelved. Can scanned the highlighted sections, jaw tight. They had this month. Just then, another ping came from the evidence tablet. Layla turned to the team. The tracker had a companion device. It just reactivated. In Houston, Rivera looked up sharply. One of the drop-off sites? Worse, Layla said, it's in the loading dock of a private medical transport company. One that subcontracted with DHS last fiscal year. The same one that's supposed to be shut down. Need eyes on that facility. Now, as the team launched a feed, the camera zoomed into a fenced compound near an industrial district. A large, unmarked van sat idling beside a warehouse bay door. 2 men in plain clothing carried a metal crate from the van's rear, just large enough to hold a small person curled up. The footage froze at Chan's command. Enhance the plate. The resolution clarified to show an one linked to a fleet owned by a company flagged in the very first trafficking case Alvarez had ever been connected to. Back at the center, Bruno suddenly rose to his feet. His body rigid, he walked to the door and barked once. Short, sharp, purposeful. Mateo's eyes widened. He remembered something, the boy said quietly. Rivera entered, having heard the bark. Mateo, do you know what that van looked like, the one you rode in? He nodded slowly. It was white, no windows. It smelled like metal and like candy? Rivera asked. He nodded. Like the mint, then his eyes lit up. There was a logo, a yellow bird with a red line across it. Rivera's face turned pale. That symbol had appeared once in a sealed investigation file, connected to a front company running pediatric courier services in 3 southern states, allegedly transporting medical cases too sensitive for standard shelters. That file had disappeared after a senior officer was reassigned. Can returned, holding the printout of the Houston facility. We just confirmed. That site was shut down last year after a licensing scandal, but it's operational again, unregistered, unofficial, and we have 2 heat signatures inside. Rivera stepped forward. We need a tactical team, but before Chan could answer, the intercom cracked with static. A voice from the garage bay came through. Ma'am, you're going to want to see this. We just got an unexpected delivery. Delivery? Yes, ma'am. A child. Left at the loading dock with no ID, wrapped in a blanket. There's a note. What does it say? It says, too old for the price. Take her instead. Inside the control room, silence had settled like a second skin. The weight of what had just happened in the garage, an abandoned child left with a note calling her too old, was still sinking into the bones of every agent present. Rivera stood near the security console, arms crossed, jaw clenched so tightly it clicked. Chan paced the room, her mind moving 10 steps ahead, calculating everything from jurisdiction to press fallout. But before they could form a complete response plan, the mainline phone buzzed. It wasn't routed through internal comms or standard DHS field connections. It was a direct line. Chan picked it up. Her voice was measured. Agent Chan, the voice on the other end, was crisp, polished, and clearly used to being obeyed. This is Raymond Carlisle. I'm calling on behalf of my client, Mr. Alvarez. I'm sure you're aware of his current detainment. Chan narrowed her eyes. He's no longer in our custody. Not officially, Carlisle said smoothly. I have reason to believe your agency has access to critical evidence that has not been properly filed under due process. That would make this an illegal investigative hold. and I'm prepared to issue a federal injunction within the hour, unless Mr. Alvarez is released. You're bluffing, Chan replied. Try me, Carlyle said coldly. His client is a private citizen, an internationally registered consultant, and may I remind you, a documented donor to Governor Hensley's re-election campaign. I doubt the governor would appreciate unlawful harassment of one of his financial partners in an election year. Chan's hand tightened around the receiver. He's under investigation for child trafficking. He hasn't been charged, Carlyle snapped. And without charges, you are now in violation of the 4th and 14th Amendments. I suggest you speak with your general counsel. Then the line went dead. Chan stood there, still holding the phone, knuckles white. Across the room, Rivera muttered, "He's pulling federal strings now?" Chan nodded once. "He's got the right connections. This lawyer isn't just some expensive mouthpiece. Raymond Carlyle is one of the top-tier political fixers in the country. You don't get him unless you're tied to real power." At that moment, Bruno lifted his head from the corner, ears twitching. Rivera looked down at him, distracted, and then remembered something. "The collar," she said. "The micro-recorder we left on him during the field run." Chan turned. "From when Alvarez was being transported between units." "Yeah, he was near Bruno during the hold. We left it running in case he slipped up." They rushed to the audio lab where Leela was still decoding files. Rivera handed her Bruno's collar. "Pull the audio file from the last 72 hours. Anything recorded when Alvarez was in the same room." Leela connected the collar to the decryption unit. The waveform populated slowly across the screen, spikes of voice activity flickering along a 24-hour timeline. One clip stood out, time-stamped at 2:43 a.m., the night Alvarez had been moved to the federal holding van. "That's our window," Layla said, and hit play. The recording began with soft ambient noise, engine hum, doors clicking shut. Then came the voice, Alvarez's voice, calm, controlled, almost bored. "The dog smelled something," he muttered. There was silence. Then a second voice, unfamiliar, lower, rougher. "Doesn't matter. They can't tie it back. It's not our name on the cargo manifest." Alvarez replied, "They're smarter than we thought. Pull the kids from LA, burn the paper trail, shift to Texas routes. Use the clinic fronts, they won't track those." Another pause, then the line that made every person in the room freeze. "The shipment's been sniffed. Plan B moves to Texas." Chan stepped back, breath shallow. He wasn't even trying to hide it. Layla was already isolating the clip, enhancing clarity and matching voice prints. "We have it," she said. "Admissible evidence, tied to intent, strategy, and coordination. This puts him not just as a courier, but as command level." They forwarded the clip to the legal division, hoping to block any attempts at bail. But less than an hour later, a courier in a tailored suit walked straight through the ICE checkpoint with a federal release order bearing the seal of the governor's office. "Mr. Alvarez is to be released to house supervision pending further review," the man declared. "Any obstruction will be considered a violation of executive authority." Rivera nearly exploded. "This is a joke," she hissed. "They just handed a trafficker back to his network." Chan stepped forward calmly. "We're not done. Let them take him, we'll track him." Back in the tech room, Bruno's data collar lit up again. Unknown to Alvarez or his lawyer, the collar had a secondary signal chip, disguised as a medical temperature sensor. It was still active. "We've got live feed," Layla confirmed. "He's headed south, and not to any residence on file." The GPS ping showed a black SUV turning off a major highway into a restricted industrial zone outside El. "Where's he going?" Chan murmured. Layla pulled satellite overlay. "Looks like a private airstrip. No flight plan filed." Meanwhile, in the van, Alvarez made a call on a burner phone tucked inside the seat. The microphone in Bruno's collar caught every word. "We lost the drop at LA," he said flatly. Bruno was tagged. Didn't know the dog was wired. Rookie mistake. He chuckled dryly. "Activate Texas, clean the safe house. We switch to medical transport containers next time. No kids walking, no witnesses. Full sedation." The signal crackled as the van hit open road. "Tell the buyer the delay was operational. We'll deliver by end of week." Chan, standing over the live transcript, whispered, "He's still moving product. He's not a pawn. He's the one feeding the chain. The digital clock above the doorway of the temporary child holding center clicked past midnight with a faint electric pulse. The halls were quiet now, dimmed for overnight security protocols, and most of the children were asleep behind their assigned doors. Mateo, however, wasn't. His small frame sat curled on a cot under a borrowed blanket, eyes open and heart thudding with the memory of voices. Voices that had said someone was coming for him. Earlier that evening, a woman had arrived with papers. Clean, official, stamped and notarized. She was calm, dressed in muted tones, and introduced herself as Mateo's aunt. She knew his birthday, his hometown, the name of the school he once attended, and the clerk on duty, a sleepy-eyed caseworker on her 6th consecutive night shift, saw nothing wrong. The ID matched, the court order bore a judge's signature. She'd even brought an overnight bag with Mateo's name already stitched on it. A call was made to confirm, and someone on a verified number from the Family Services database answered and affirmed the arrangement. Within 20 minutes, Mateo was signed out, escorted down a narrow hallway and out a rear access door where a nondescript gray minivan waited. Engine. He hesitated at the threshold, turning once, as if hoping to hear a familiar bark. But there was only silence. Then the woman took his hand and pulled him forward. In the adjacent wing, Bruno stirred in his enclosure. He had been placed there temporarily to rest, fed and groomed after his long day assisting agents. But now he sat up abruptly, nose flaring, a low growl formed in his throat, barely audible. Then he stood, pacing once, twice, ears pivoting like radar. Something was wrong. The scent, faint but familiar, drifted in from the hallway vent. Mateo, and something else, someone else. The wrong kind of human scent. He barked once, sharp, alarmed, then again. The night guard on kennel duty stood, startled, and approached with a biscuit. "Easy, boy, it's lights out." But Bruno wasn't interested in treats. He backed toward the far end of the enclosure and, in one fluid motion, lunged forward, jaws clamping down on the gate's central latch. With a metallic snap, it gave way. The guard yelped, backing up as the shepherd bolted down the hall, following the residual scent trail like a missile locked onto target. Outside, the van had just pulled onto the service road behind the center when Bruno rounded the corner at full speed. His paws pounded the pavement, nostrils wide, chest heaving. He spotted the vehicle, low taillights glowing red as it turned into the main road. Without hesitation, he chased. The van accelerated, unaware of the four-legged shadow closing in. Bruno cut across the grass embankment, dodging trash bins and streetlights. At the last second, the van veered right and disappeared onto a dirt access road, tires spitting dust. Bruno stopped, sniffing hard, turning toward the sound of an approaching vehicle, Agent Rivera's car. She had been notified by the kennel alert system triggered by Bruno's breakout. When she spotted the dog standing in the middle of the road, she slammed the brakes, jumped out, and shouted, "What the hell, Bruno?" But he didn't bark. He ran. Toward the dust, Rivera cursed under her breath and jumped back into the car, flipping on lights and sirens, following him into the night. 10 minutes later, they were deep into borderland scrub, pockets of dry brush and abandoned farmland, fenced off and long forgotten. Bruno slowed near a rusted gate, sniffed once, then bolted through a hole beneath the wire. Rivera pulled over, flashlight in hand, heart racing. She followed the dog through the fence and across a narrow field toward a squat, single-story building, roof sagging. As she drew closer, she could hear it. Faint cries, the shuffle of movement, and then a whisper, "Ayuda! Help!" She radioed Chan immediately. "I've got something. Bruno led me to a structure. Sounds like kids inside. Request backup, coordinates pinging now." Chan's voice crackled back. "Hold perimeter, we're inbound with a team." Rivera circled the structure, her flashlight catching a broken padlock at the side entrance. She pushed gently. The door creaked open, revealing a dark corridor lined with thin mattresses and crates. The smell hit her. Sweat, fear, antiseptic. A child peeked from behind one of the crates, maybe 8 years old. Eyes wide, lips trembling. "Donde está Mateo?" Rivera whispered. The child pointed toward the back room. Rivera stepped slowly through the maze, heart pounding. She found Mateo sitting beside 2 other children, twins by the look of them, curled up beneath a silver thermal blanket. His face was blank for a second, Then he whispered, "Bruno?" And like a phantom answering a prayer, Bruno appeared in the doorway, chest heaving, ears up. Matteo stood slowly and walked to him, burying his face into the dog's neck. By the time the task force arrived, 12 children had been found, each one recorded as transferred to unrelated shelters across the country, all of them reassigned with fabricated guardian documents. The building contained nothing but crates, blankets, and a single laptop, its hard drive freshly wiped but still warm. Outside, Chan directed the team to search for vehicles. One SUV was found half a mile out, engine cold, keys missing, no driver, but footprints, large ones, led away into the brush. Bruno tracked them a few yards before stopping, growling at a patch of ground where tire treads suddenly reappeared. Rivera helped Matteo into a blanket and sat beside him, placing her hand on his shoulder. "They won't take you again," she said. "I promise." He didn't answer. He simply leaned into Bruno, who refused to leave his side, eyes locked on the darkness outside as if expecting someone to come back. The dawn was barely beginning to color the sky in pale gray when the tactical team arrived at the perimeter of the abandoned house. Dust still hung in the air from the midnight approach, and tire tracks from the escaped SUV had already begun to fade under the desert wind. Rivera stood near the mobile command unit, her jacket zipped high, fingers gripping a cup of lukewarm coffee she had no intention of drinking. Matteo was safe in the back of the van, monitored by 2 agents and, as always, guarded by Bruno, who lay beside him with his ears pricked and his eyes watching every movement outside. But this wasn't over. There were more footprints, more signs of recent occupancy deeper into the brush beyond the initial structure. And from the satellite scans conducted moments earlier, they had identified another building, a short hike through the mesquite, a prefab concrete bunker barely visible from above. "Whatever's there," Chan said, staring at the monitor, "that's where the rest of the trail leads. And if they left kids here, they might have moved others there." The order was given. SWAT moved in from 2 angles, silent and focused, flanking the north and east approaches. Rivera and Bruno joined the secondary entry team, sweeping behind old fencing and stacked pallets. As they approached, the bunker door was ajar, a thin mist drifting out from inside. Rivera sniffed once. The scent was wrong. "Chemical. Gas," she said into her radio. "Something's venting in there. Could be sabotage or a leak." She turned to Bruno. "He'll stay close," but the dog growled low, then took off, breaking protocol. "Bruno," she shouted, following fast, raising her weapon. Structure, the air grew thick and cold. Dim lights flickered overhead, casting an eerie yellow hue on the walls. Bruno darted toward the rear room, where a metal door had been left cracked open. From within came a low hiss, constant and ominous. When Rivera reached the threshold, she saw it, Matteo's name scrawled in marker on a crate, next to an overturned cot and a small child-sized mask lying on the floor. The hiss grew louder. Something was leaking from a pipe in the far wall. Rivera's eyes burned. "Get hazmat down here," she said hoarsely into the radio. But before she could retreat, a shadow moved in the smoke. A man. Armed, he lifted his weapon in panic and fired. Bruno lunged from the side in a blur of fur and muscle. The bullet tore through his left shoulder, spinning him sideways, but he didn't stop. The dog slammed into Matteo's crate, teeth gripping the boy's collar, dragging him back as the gas thickened and sparks snapped from an exposed fuse box near the door. Rivera grabbed Matteo's hand, pulling him with all her strength as the room began to rattle from the pressure. Bruno limped beside them, blood streaking down his flank, but he stayed up, pushing forward with stubborn force. Behind them, a small ignition flared in the pipe, but didn't catch. Someone had tried to turn the place into a trap, but the timer hadn't finished arming. They burst out into the morning light coughing, and Rivera collapsed near the command van, cradling Matteo and yelling for a medic. Bruno stumbled once, then dropped beside them, chest heaving. "He's hit," Rivera shouted. "He's kid, but he saved him." The field medic rushed in with a trauma kit, and the team lifted Bruno onto a stretcher rigged for canine transport. Matteo, tears running down his dirt-streaked cheeks, wouldn't let go of the leash. "Don't take him away from me," he cried. "He needs me now." While medics worked, Chan received a call from the secondary extraction unit, who had entered another structure nearby. "We've got survivors," the officer on the line said. 5 kids, 4 boys, 1 girl. The girl's unresponsive but alive. "Name?" Chan asked. "She had a necklace," the officer said. "Do a quick check." Rivera, overhearing, pulled up a file from earlier cases. She stopped, blinking. "Emily Carson," she read aloud. "Age 7. Reported missing 2 months ago. Presumed dead after no leads." Chan's heart skipped. Who filed the report? Rivera looked at the screen, then slowly turned. "Captain Joseph Carson, LAP." Moments later, the line to Captain Carson was opened. His voice cracked on the second sentence. "Are you sure, Emily, my Emily?" Rivera answered softly. "She's alive. She's weak, but she's alive." Silence followed, then a deep breath, and the sound of a man trying to hold together years of grief. "Thank you," he said. "Please don't let her be alone." Chan dispatched an escort chopper for Emily, bypassing all red tape. They wouldn't lose this one. Back in the temporary field tent, Mateo sat beside Bruno's stretcher, holding his paw. The dog's side was wrapped in gauze, an IV line threaded through a vein. A vet nurse whispered, "He's strong, he'll make it if the bleeding stops." Mateo didn't answer. He just leaned closer, whispering into Bruno's ear, "You came for me again. I won't let them take me anymore, I promise." Outside, the last of the rescued children were being transported to the nearest trauma center. Rivera handed Chan a folder containing updated files, new names, new guardianship claims, new falsified histories, all traced to the same source. A single logistics front operating through a clinic in southern Texas, with ties to every single trafficking waypoint they'd encountered. They were going to gas the kids and torch the site, Rivera said. "Make it all disappear." Chan nodded. "But Bruno changed that. Mateo changed that." Then she paused. "But we still haven't found Alvarez." The hospital room was dim and quiet, save for the steady beep of a heart monitor and the faint hum of IV pumps. Bruno lay on a wide padded bed lined with sterile sheets, his side wrapped in clean white bandages, chest rising and falling slowly beneath the sedative. The emergency veterinary team had operated for nearly 3 hours, removing the bullet and closing the internal bleeding. Now he rested, body still fighting, spirit unbroken. Mateo hadn't left his side since the stretcher rolled in. He sat on a small plastic chair, knees pulled to his chest, one hand curled gently around Bruno's paw. For the first time since everything began, since the moment he crossed the border, since the lies and fake candy and follow promises, he let himself cry. Not the quiet, hidden tears of a scared child trying to be brave, but real tears, loud, shaking, raw. The kind of cry that cracked him open from the inside. Nurses passed by and gave him space. Rivera stood in the hallway watching silently, one hand pressed to her chest as if holding her own heart together. "He's going to live," the vet had said. But the only thing keeping him grounded right now. News of the rescue operation spread fast. By sunrise, national outlets were running headlines about every agency that had once stonewalled the task force now demanded access to the evidence. But Alvarez was gone, until he wasn't. 2 days after the rescue, he was apprehended on a private airfield in Juarez, attempting to board an unregistered jet with a Venezuelan diplomat's forged credentials. He didn't resist. He just smiled and asked, "Who do I get to call first?" The trial was scheduled swiftly, under the pressure of public outrage and media scrutiny. Charges ranged from human trafficking, child endangerment, wire fraud, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy against the state. Rivera sat in the courtroom beside Mateo, who had been granted special protective status and now lived temporarily with a bilingual foster guardian, familiar with awarded official honors and a permanent medical retirement designation. Though he would never work again, he remained at Mateo's side, leash swathed for loyalty. As the trial began, the prosecution's case was built solidly on the audio evidence and the survivor testimonies. Each child's name was read aloud, 17 confirmed victims, 5 still receiving psychological treatment, 2 nonverbal, all connected to forged documents processed through Alvarez's logistics network. But what truly rattled the courtroom was not the charges, it was who sat on the jury. Ordinal's juror, an emaciated female, mid-30s, soft brown curls, calm gaze. Her name was Celia Maris, a mid-level clerk from a DC contractor specializing in information security. On the second day of testimony, just after Rivera gave her deposition about Bruno's discovery and the tracker device, Celia requested to speak to the judge in chambers. What followed cracked the case open in a way no one expected. She admitted under seal that she had once been approached by an intermediary on Alvarez's behalf, 2 years earlier, offered a 6-figure payment to reroute a security audit connected to one of the child transport networks. She had refused, but the case had been buried anyway. What she kept copies. I knew someday the paper trail would mean something, she said, but I didn't know I'd be sitting across from the man who paid to erase it. The judge ordered an emergency evidentiary hearing. The files were real: internal memos, transport logs, clearance slips signed by deputy department heads, all pointing to a quiet directive issued by an undersecretary now on indefinite leave. Overnight, the trial shifted from criminal to historic. Governmental heads rolled. Governors denied involvement. The Secretary of Health and Human Services released a statement condemning all private contract loopholes. Investigations bloomed in every state tied to the network. Alvarez, facing a cascade of new charges, offered a plea deal, attempting to trade names for leniency. But the DA refused. "This isn't about cutting deals anymore," the prosecutor said. "This is about making sure no one like you breathes free air again." Back in the hospital, Mateo watched the verdict announcement live from Bruno's recovery room. Alvarez was sentenced to 6 consecutive life terms, no parole. The boy didn't say a word, but when he turned and saw Bruno's eyes blinking open slowly, he smiled for the first time since the courtroom door closed behind their enemy. He leaned in, pressing his forehead to the dog's stomach. Bruno's tail thumped once against the bed. If this story moved you, don't forget to like and subscribe for more cinematic, emotionally driven storytelling. Which twist caught you off guard the most? And where in the world are you watching from? Drop a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts.